Hello and welcome everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks. I'm joined here with Matt, aka War Champ, and we just watched two movies out of South Korea from director Park Chan-wook in Bong Hu Joon or Joon-ho rather. And first of all, Matt, how are you doing? And have you kind of any background in South Korean movies prior to watching these two movies?
I'm doing well. And I don't really have one besides like seeing a lot of the or some of the more common movies from South Korea, like or popular ones like Parasite. And I'd also seen another Bong Joon-ho movie called The Host, which is pretty good. I really like that one too. But that's my only experience. It's pretty limited.
I think the area got a lot of popularity from Old Boy, and then I think Parasite really gave it arguably the most amount of attention. Rightfully so, too, because I think they have very distinct voices. I've seen certain proficiencies to be nearly uniform across the board, and they're telling very interesting stories, and the cultural spin that you see coming out of that area makes it really cool. And I'm assuming, Matt, because of the popularity, especially after 2019 and Parasite came out, much like myself, did that kind of spur you on to like have a mental note kind of in the back of your head that you wanted to maybe check out more films coming out of that area?
Yes, yes, that definitely happened because I really enjoyed Parasite. What I liked most is how the story and the plot just like really it was really engaging for me, and it kept me like I was paying attention. I was really interested to know what happened, and then the characters were also really interesting in Parasite too. And so I thought, and then I saw a lot of stuff about his other movie, Memories of Murder. I had seen people talk about that movie a lot and how good it is. I haven't seen that one yet, but I imagine it's probably got a similar really cool plot line that with a lot of twists and turns to it. And then I also saw that Bong Joon-ho was creating like a sci-fi movie called like Mickey 17, and it's going to come out 2024, I think. And that looks really cool. Like I'd want to see that one right when it premiered.
Yeah, that film looks very interesting. I believe Robert Pattinson is pinned to be the leading man for that movie. And knowing what I know about Bong Joon-ho, and also what I've come to kind of realize with Pattinson's latest performances, it feels like that's going to be a very, very good movie, and one that I'm also very interested to see. Uh, Something I was kind of talking about with you, Matt, before we started recording that I think is definitely worth mentioning is that both Park Chan Wook and Bong Joon Ho is that they are both writers on the majority of their projects, and I find that to be with these two as well as the other projects that I've seen of these two directors. I find the writing to be the probably one of the best parts, along with the cinematography, and so they clearly have very very strong suits amongst these two, and I think you could very much argue for either one of the two directors we're talking about here that they could be at the top, if not the top director working right now. Um, Let me ask you, Matt, just because I know you've seen a few films from these guys, but you very much love cinema. Who are some of your, I guess, top directors who are, currently working?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Cause currently working, I gotta try and think about that. I mean, I love, obviously like Christopher Nolan, all the more popular people. like Paul Thomas Anderson.
Hmm.
Godard recently passed away, but I really enjoyed him. I'm trying to think. There's a French director named Oliver Assayas I really like, and he's still making movies today. Um, I Greg Akari, if you know who that is, he did that movie Mysterious Skin and this other one that I like called The Doom Generation. It's kind of like all over the place, but like I try and keep up with like people who are still working today because sometimes I find myself watching older movies because I think, oh, I need to watch all of these, or like I need to like get closer to completing the 1,000 greatest movies of all time list. So sometimes I pick in different weird ways, and I so yeah.
I completely understand because I like in my letterbox profile, I had realized I was really only watching like current movies mostly, and through doing podcasts with you, Ethan, Guillermo, everyone that I've had the honor of like getting to record with, there was so many movies in the past that I still haven't seen, but especially then. And I've been doing kind of that same thing, trying to get more exposure to that whilst mixing in like these new projects that I'm very much excited about. So it is very hard to balance, but I will say I think getting to watching the older movies can very much put the new ones that you see in a more refined perspective. Do you find any credence to that?
Definitely, because you kind of see the origins of where things came from, and like I've found points in like different parts of history where I like tend to enjoy those movies more. I enjoy like a western that doesn't get made nowadays, or like a noir film, which is not really a genre that's very popular anymore. So I like you would never really watch or realize or know if you liked an actual noir unless you like experimented and watched some, black and white movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But just to like, because I kind of needed a second to think about the directors, and I kind of came up with a few that I enjoy that are still working today. Um, and I just wanted to put these out there because I felt like my last answer wasn't that great. But I really like Richard Linklater,
Mm,
Harmony Korine, um, Terrence Malick. Honestly, like Gaspar Noé.
mm.
A lot of the people that now I think about it, like we've talked about a lot of these directors on this podcast.
Yeah, and they are. I think of those names, they are so distinct, very unique, possibly the most unique directors I've ever really had the honor of like getting to watch their stuff. Um, and I think they're more. I'm trying to find the correct like adjective, but there's certainly a difference between that and Bong Joon-ho and uh, Park Chan-wook. But I do think that these two are really distinct as well. Just kind of they have their strong suits are in different areas for sure. But I want to ask you as well because I've found that you've definitely you have exposure to films from multiple different foreign films from multiple different areas, and I think you've been able to kind of catch on to a lot of the movements that have happened in the past, especially by doing that. And I want to ask you, is there any movement or kind of country that comes out with a specific type of movie that speaks closest to you? And if so, do you kind of like what about those movies kind of connect with you the most? So, like, for example, if French New Wave did, maybe it's the narrative structure that those films generally have. Is there an example of that, I guess, that connects mostly to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So like a few different things. I think the most connection, and I still haven't really figured out why this is, but I just really like French movies. But like when I think about it, a lot of the times like I think they're pretentious. Like I went and saw that movie Contempt, the Godard movie, at a theater
Mm-hmm.
last week, and like in the middle of it, these two girls like got up and they like said like this is so stupid like really loud enough for like everyone in the theater could hear it, and they like walked out, and I thought that was so funny because I was like, well, this is definitely their first like encounter with a Godard movie, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyways, back on topic. I really enjoy those movies, and I think a lot of it is like the cinematography, and then another part is the way they tell stories. And like this is a huge difference between that you can see when you watch like a French movie and then you watch like one of these South Korean movies, is like the way the French tend to tell stories is they it's like very like the cinematography, like the story does not feel concrete. I want to say like it feels more like fluffy. Like things just kind of happen, and then the plot a lot of the times you kind of like make the connection in your head. And so I feel like you can either love or hate those movies, and a lot of that is like if you make that connection or not. And I think that a lot of the times people that do make the connection, maybe they like think they're above other people and it comes off as pretentious. But for me, I think those connections are just easier to make once you've seen more movies. Maybe because like I think a big deal is like not having an expectation when you go into a movie. Like when I first started watching French movies, I used to keep expecting like, oh, when is like this character gonna die, or like when is like the big event gonna happen, like the climax of the movie gonna happen, and then like you realize over time like French movies don't have any of that stuff. So it's kind of like all those weird things, like, and also the topics like the philosophy stuff that really is something that I've been into for a long time. But then I'll say like one more like kind of area that I've really resonated with, and this is very strange, but I really love like 50s melodramas, like like romance movies. For
Mm-hmm.
some reason, like it feels so nostalgic to me, and like I can't like I maybe it's my love for history, but when I watch those movies, I keep thinking like in my head I'm going, wow, like look how different they were culturally. And for some
Mm-hmm.
reason that just really interests me. Like I really like seeing all the differences between like how they acted like in relationships in the 50s compared to now.
Yeah, and I think the difference in how different it is really like speaks to you. And ironically, one of the reasons that I actually really like with South Korea, specifically these two, but I have found like others to be able to do this, like with The Wailing is one, and there's another South Korean film that I've seen that I really enjoy as well that I can't put my finger on. But specifically, Park Chan-wook and Bong Joon-ho, is that their abilities to do like mysteries are, they seem very much inspired by Alfred Hitchcock from one perspective. So it doesn't quite seem like they're ripping him off by any means because their stories are so distinct, but that the the story is so concrete, it's so well thought out. It doesn't feel cheap in its reveal whatsoever. And the only person that I've really seen prior to that be able to do that and really think through every little nuance to the story and then have the reveal feel fitting and also be impactful is Hitchcock. And I feel like Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho really have been able to do that really well. And to see that like in a modern era where it feels like it has a fresh twist on it as well is like really really cool to see. So I'm definitely going to continue watching these two for that reason alone, because I do love Alfred Hitchcock and I'm beginning to love these two. And the other film movement that really, really connects with me, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's really like Japanese cinema. I'm talking like 50s all the way through the 80s, specifically connected to Kurosawa and also Kobayashi. Their samurai films, like that's a distinct subgenre that I've just really, really liked. And Tarantino's been able to put his spin on it, and I really liked what he did with it. But those are like the two kind of foreign areas that I've really, really enjoyed. And I've heard a ton about these guys, and I didn't jump on like their films too quickly after Parasite. Parasite I've seen in this year, so it took me a while to really get on board. But I do think the hype is justified. Do you kind of feel the same, Matt?
Yeah, so I think the Hitchcock comparison is interesting because that's actually not even really a connection I made. So they definitely aren't ripping him off, but now that I think about it more, like the way it's kind of about like the way they unravel the story, how the plot narrative, is how it all kind of comes to fruition. Like it's kind of like they unveiled, at least in Handmaiden, I'm thinking of different parts of the story at different times, and that kind of keeps you guessing as to like not only what's going on, which that part kind of bothered me a little, but you're kind of like guessing what's going on, and then like new things are being revealed, and it's like in the same way Hitchcock like makes you um scared or just like wondering what's happening next, and that big reveal that he ends up doing at some point in almost all of his movies, that kind of pretty much exists, I'd say, in the South Korean film. So I think that it actually is like a really interesting like tie-in. But yeah, I think the only other person for some reason that I keep comparing these movies to in my mind is like Christopher Nolan, and maybe that's just because the way their stories unfold are just very like it's very narrative driven,
Mm-hmm.
but the difference is these South Korean ones have a lot more twists, and I feel like the South Korean like they like to play with the narrative more, and maybe Christopher Nolan is kind of like playing around with time itself. Like in the movie, like time is a factor, but in kind of these South Korean films, they're like going back and forth in time, and it's a way that like by going around, moving around in time, that is like what makes the movie good in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the what they're able to do with their like reveals is you turn a page and there might be one element that you were wondering about answered, but it sets up multiple other questions that will be revealed early on or later on. And I really like that specifically with Handmaiden, but that is also like the case with Old Boy, a Park Chan-wook movie. That's also the case I think you could find with Memories of a Murder, and Mother is another really good example of that. They are constantly kind of putting into place more questions that you want to have answered. So you're constantly engaged with the movie. And I really like that. It feels kind of interactive in that way, or it keeps you thinking. And along with the cinematography, which we talked about earlier, it just feels like there's always something for you to really kind of latch onto with their films.
Yeah, and even like Snowpiercer, like it's a little more subtle, but like I think the way the plot unfolds is very different than a normal narrative. Like a normal narrative, and from my experience, would have like presented the history of what happened, the train, all from in the very beginning of the movie, and then I think like the resistance would have been building up, and then they kind of would have had like a final conflict with as the climax of the movie. But in Snowpiercer, like it's very different. Like you don't even learn about the history or background of what happened until like halfway through the movie when the characters are like at a place where they're telling them about it. Like I'm thinking of the scene where in that classroom
Mm.
and the teacher's like telling them about like the history of what happened. But like the way it kind of unravels in Snowpiercer is also uh very creative in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think I underestimated how creatively that was done, and you brought up a good point because I absolutely agree, and you get more and more knowledge, and there's more and more world building and history building done as you progress. So you have things that keep you engaged, and then information kind of follows it. It felt very organic in that way. There wasn't what you would maybe consider like exposition dumps. It was like it felt like it kind of came about organically how you learned more about it. And that goes into another aspect that I was kind of talking about as I was explaining that, in that Bong Joon-ho, I think what he was able to accomplish with Snowpiercer was really interesting in that he showed maybe with an IP that is, I would assume, could be very popular in South Korea, but not something very commonly known in the US, is that he took an IP unknown for the most part, but was able to make it into something very, very interesting to where I think there was enough of an appetite that it actually spurred there to be a show because people wanted to kind of dive into that world even more so. And I think with, a popular IP, like a Marvel IP, there's already going to be that kind of that initial interest. But I think Bong Joon Ho was able to go at it from the other way. Like, look, I'm gonna make you interested in that, and I became very much invested and interested in that train and the story and the history of it all. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I actually did not know it was an IP at all until you just said that. I just thought this was like a super original creative story. There may have been something at the beginning that tells you, but yeah, I thought that like the whole idea was really interesting. Like I knew after watching it, I was like, okay, this is like a movie with a really interesting premise. I was thinking like I can't believe I haven't like seen this anywhere else before. Because that just the whole idea of like a post kind of apocalyptic, or I guess not apocalyptic because it's everything just froze. What like a world where everyone's extinct basically except the people on the train and it's just going around and around. Like that's a very cool premise for a story.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because like an end of a world scenario where there's only these survivors has been done, but having everyone isolated and not isolated, but kind of stuck together, but also in tiers or class systems, it was a really neat and tidy way to create the class breakdown that they wanted for this, and also it worked very well for the progression that you had to kind of work your way all the way to the front of the train too. So it all felt very just really creative and really genius to create the perfect kind of environment to tell this story. It's a story that's really heavy on socio-economic commentary as well as kind of ecological and kind of global health type of story as well. And I found this to be a really unique vehicle, no pun intended, to get those messages across.
Yeah, I think it does like a good job of telling like an interesting story in its own right, but then along with that, it seems to teach about like classism type stuff, like without being so direct about it. Like it's not telling you anything about this, it's just like showing these people. It kind of makes me think of like a Lord of the Flies story or a story where, people are trapped or stranded together in a really dire situation, like what happens after that. And I think those kinds of stories are really intriguing, and they've always been something like the type of story I've been interested in because you kind of learn about, I guess the best way to put it is like people's primal nature. Like, what are people going to do if you strip away like government, any type of like society, like what we would just call like society in general? Like, there's technically a society there, but like, there's no government, there's like no real money anymore. Like, they probably just exchange bullets or whatever's valuable on the train. Like, you just think about this whole new world where all of our everything in our social life and our life in general is just like gone, and it's completely changed. Like, who comes out on top? Like, and it's interesting because this kind of tells you that whoever came out on top just like happened to have an obsession with trains, and he just so happened to be right about that freeze thing. And so, it's like it kind of ends up as a sort of a luck type thing.
You know, as you were kind of going through that, you brought up an interesting question in my mind. Because it reminded me of some of the details as they're going through the train, and you can see as they progress through the train, you kind of get to the wealthy people, and how you were kind of talking about like there's no real currency anymore. And I just thought it to be kind of really interesting that the class that was established from the onset of when they boarded the train is kept in place kind of by the officials of the train throughout the entirety of the timeline from them boarding to 17, 18 years later, which I it kind of, it confounds me a little bit because it's like, well, the rich people really, they don't have any wealth to kind of keep their spot on the train, and it is kind of interesting that they are still kept there despite physically being weaker than the actual people in the lowest class on the train. Yet the people at the head of the train must find it to be important to keep that class divide and to keep people who probably could overtake that area where they currently are. And I don't know, you just kind of opened that up in my head, and I didn't really think about it until you put it the way that like there's no more currency beside where you really are and what you get because you've just been there the whole time.
Right. Like, it made me think like, okay, so it probably started with, the head train guy was in charge, and maybe the way that the power system ended up like unfolding, or how people were put in their place, was he had like a little group possibly of people that just happened to have weapons at the time, and they kind of, with weapons you're going to be able to take advantage of people that don't have weapons. And so I'm just thinking, like, the way it played out is just, it's kind of like a luck thing, and like a who you happen to know at the time the disaster unfolded. And then it also makes me think about, how people dominate over other people when there can't be like governments that sort of control things, and politicians that are elected, and these different kinds of systems we have in place to prevent like a complete, like, different, or like what it would be called the state of nature, or like the state before there were governments. Like, the stuff we have in place to prevent that kind of thing is gone, then whoever ends up taking power is just like whoever has the most resources at the time, which in this case would be like weapons, or whoever can physically dominate someone else ends up being the person on top. I think that's kind of like an interesting thing I got from the movie.
And I want to get your perspective on this too, Matt, because I think you could have a perspective that maybe fully fleshes this out. Because this is like a skeleton of an idea that I'm going to throw out there. But it seems to me as though Bong Joon-ho is maybe trying to ask the question that class systems, as much as they're just kind of theoretical things, I mean, you can delineate based on maybe an arbitrary amount of money, what have you, in the real world, but can be kind of clearly defined in this movie, are generally going to be inherited and or you're going to stay in them for really no reason whatsoever unless someone at a lower rung makes a concerted effort, whether it be through revolution, action, anything like that, to kind of climb up the socio-economic ladder. It's kind of, I think he's trying to comment on these kind of invisible thoughts that take very physical places in our world, and how it is possible to kind of fight against that, but action must be taken. I think, I mean, that's kind of the skeleton of the idea, but I wanted to get your perspective. What do you think he was kind of trying to say with that, I guess?
Yeah, like I think like I thought about Parasite and how he's kind of saying very similar things in that
Mm.
about like class and stuff. At least in South, it's more about, in Korea in that movie. But like I think like what you were just saying and is right. Like unless someone takes a stand and tries to like overthrow the current regime, things are just going to be the way they are. And like you see this throughout history all the time, like the way tons of nations are formed. Maybe like every nation is through typically like they're overthrowing a prior regime that was in power, and it's usually not, it's usually through violence. So like you think of like the Civil War, like the founding of the like United States. That's what I meant to say, not the Civil War. And you think of like even in gangster movies that would like Godfather, you think of like when people form groups in any kind of group, like the way people rise to power is by it's usually like a charismatic person that can gather enough people to kind of be on their side, and then they like make a move at the top person. And that could just be the movie way that things happen. But I think real life is similar. It's a lot more complicated, but that's like the general thing.
I absolutely agree. And like you said, it takes more time, and there's many more battles to be won physically and politically, just like idea warfare, like trying to have people come to your side of, thought when it comes to two separate areas, or two different sides, I guess. But what I found to be very, very interesting is, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but there's an elder leader of the kind of the bottom of the train or the back of the train, and obviously the man at the front who kind of protects the engine, who is the man who created everything. And the revelation and spoilers for anyone who has yet to see Snowpiercer, but that they were actually working together and creating this kind of ecosystem that needed to stay in equilibrium in order for them to work. So they had to work together. The head and the tail had to work together in their minds for this all to kind of stay afloat. And that was a huge twist, a really brilliant twist, I thought. And I wanted to get your perspective on what you thought was trying to be said, I guess, on a greater scale from that.
Yeah, that was something that was really interesting to me. And when he said that in the film, I was thinking it it's like one of those situations where whoever is kind of more, I would say, like sociopathic or more willing to take advantage of someone else and not have as much empathy for the other person, will tend to be the one in that kind of situation to come out on top because they don't care about like screwing the other guy over. Like that sounded like that guy was his friend, But over time, maybe it could be so many things. Like the power got to his head, maybe, and he just didn't feel like working with him anymore, or he wasn't getting everything he wanted. He got greedy, and so he wanted to take more resources and left the other guy screwed over. And then he has him like killed basically, in the middle of the movie. Which obviously at that point he's not his friend at all anymore. So I just think, to put it simply, he seems like he was the one more willing to take advantage of a situation where he was like saw an opportunity, and he didn't care that about the other guy. And those people tend to come out on top in like business and a lot of other areas of life.
I think what you said has a lot of truth to it, because the kind of the leader of the tale is what I'll not Chris Evans, but the elderly man who is missing a leg and an arm. I think it's proof of that because he was so empathetic and he was so caring that he was willing to give up his arm, in another really great and brilliant like reveal that happens near the end that we'll kind of go into a little bit more after this. But he was willing to give up his arm in order to save a human life. And it was a way of showing that he was willing to sacrifice as a leader, so he gained trust in that way. But it felt very genuine because he was willing to make this sacrifice in order to not, I guess, kill hope for that side. And I feel like the tail leader is like what you could consider to be like a true ambivalent leader who is willing to make sacrifices for the greater whole. And then the head leader, as you were kind of alluding to and stating, is someone who is callous enough, cunning enough, charismatic, but also headstrong and motivated enough to make sacrifices of others, like kind of the brutal sacrifices when it comes to killing others, make violent sacrifices, for lack of a better term, to also keep things running. So I think it gives like really, really interesting looks at the flip sides of the same coin, because I don't think it's much easier to see what sacrifices are being made from the tail, but I think you also have to look in and say, well, this guy has to make really callous decisions at the top. But if he didn't, then the whole thing ceases to exist. And I guess you kind of have to wonder which side is harder. And I think that is something that the movie does kind of try to present to the audience.
Yeah, I think you put that really well. I hadn't really actually thought about it quite that way, but it made me think how how that the conductor, like the you could say the more evil guy, was doing that out of necessity. Like, it's just in certain situations you have to do those kinds of things, because the other choice would just be like everybody starves and more people probably die. So it's like, yeah, he was bad for doing that, but you were right. Like, it's one of those things that had to be done, and it was more brutal and harsh. But I'm thinking maybe that having to make those tough decisions for such a long time, you become like unfazed by it after you've done it enough times. And then
Mm-hmm.
that kind of turns you into someone you didn't used to be. So this guy maybe he probably was perfectly normal and really was friends with the other end conductor at the beginning of the train ride. But then, as things progressed, he started having to make these difficult decisions. And then over time, he's just like, well, it's just another, I've already killed like 5 groups of people. I might as well do this one too.
And something, it just kind of occurred to me, but it seems so clear when I kind of put it in perspective outside of the film, is that the the head of the train has to be very much inspired by, I think dictators is really the most specific group that I can really attribute it to. And the reason I say it becomes really clear to me, I would assume because living in South Korea, where I think every man who's physically able at some point has to enlist. I think it's mandatory enlistment, or I forget what the specific term is, but I think you have to do military service for 4 years minimum, unless there's a career issue, what you leave the country before age. There's certain ways that you can get out of it, but I don't know whether Bong Joon-ho or Park Chan-wook are two individuals who enlisted, but they did grow up in South Korea. And I feel like the tensions between North Korea and South Korea have to be something you live with on an everyday level, something that is ever present and that you are very much aware of on a day to day basis. And I feel like that had to kind of inspire that political aspect where the kind of person running the engine feels very much inspired by a dictator. When you look at what was going on in the schools, where they seemingly every day watch a video on that man, someone who seems very misunderstood until he becomes the leader of a society. I just feel like there's tons of tie-ins that were very intentionally placed, and I think that's something that he's additionally trying to comment on with this movie. And I want to get your kind of perspective on that, Matt.
So, just kind of the fact that he can you kind of explain like briefly like what you wanted my perspective on? I'm sorry.
Well, I guess, what do you think the relationship or the greater points that Bong Joon Ho is trying to make about these leaders who kind of come to power through, calamities and have like absolute power, I guess?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, my thought on that would be like maybe connected to what I was saying before, how it can really change you as a person. Like I'm thinking about like some of the worst dictators in history, like Stalin and Hitler. And when you think about those like people, like they're so and this movie doesn't exactly like show like the rise of a dictator or anything. So it doesn't exactly explore all of what I'm going to talk about, but like what I think of is like, Stalin and Hitler, when they were younger, they weren't necessarily evil already. They weren't bad. You couldn't say they were like bad people before they had like when they were 12 or 15. It's like something it was like a culmination of things that happened in their life, maybe combined with the power that they got that led them to end up being this person that actually was like a really bad, evil kind of guy. And it's hard to say like exactly what it is that leads to people like acting so cold and cruel and like all they care about is power and like they have these like have to kill a bunch of people like because you think in real life like Stalin didn't necessarily need to execute all the people he did, but in this train it might have been necessary because people literally couldn't have been fed.
Hmm.
So I think like to put it, I don't know, to summarize my thought, maybe he is trying to say something about the way leaders rise to power in general. Because I think he's also making a comment, because I don't think we've talked as much about the way, who's it, Chris Evans, the main character, rises to power himself. He's charismatic. And then I think at the very end, okay, I just thought of this. This kind of completes what I'm trying to say. So at the very end, the main guy is kind of trying to convince him. He's like, you're basically going to become me in the future, and he really doesn't like Chris Evans' character doesn't really want that. And then you've got to think, well, in that situation, most people would accept that.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a genuinely hard offer to kind of pass up on, right? But I think it flies in the face of what he set out for, and it seemed like he set out for change, and I think he realized that, not to get like too metaphorical or too political or anything, but it was a corrupt system from the get go, in that
Yeah.
children were required, like child labor was required to keep the machine running, quite literally, in that there was no way that he could actually make a meaningful change. And that was what he really all he wanted. I think he didn't even want that role, and he would have been happy with someone else from his group being the leader if it meant change. But once he realized that wasn't possible, it was like, well, this all might be better off just ending.
Yeah, and I think that could, because I realized I was kind of rambling a bit just a second ago, but I think that can kind of like put together what I was, maybe what I think his comment on it was, that these leaders, a lot of the times when they're rising up, they want change for the good. Like they really
Mm-hmm.
think this is a good thing they're doing. They have people supporting them. Like Hitler had a ton of people supporting him. They think what they're doing is good. And then over time, like they might realize the system can't be the way they envision it. Like maybe they're more idealists and they realize this can't work in reality, and so they try and make it work, and then that ends up like people just end up getting killed and terrible things end up happening. So maybe that's kind of what he's trying to say.
Yeah, and I think the ending, like the very end, it poses another really good question, because Chris Evans has seen almost the full circle of what the train can make you do. It can make you do really terrible things, but it can also help you rise up to do what you think are very beneficial things, but then realizes it is entirely cyclical, in that there is really no way to break through unless this entire system is actually just completely destroyed. And it is, when you look at it on a grand scale, you can probably really easily argue that what they did was for the worsement of everyone involved. But you might be able to even pull back further or zoom in, and say that it was actually the most benevolent thing to do, is to completely send the entire system crashing down. And that if there's an ability for a society to actually thrive or live in this new climate, that is the only way that we should continue on, I guess. And if this is the end for us, it's the end. But if we can continue, that's the only way that we should. What is your kind of perspective on that, and how do you look at the ending of the movie?
Yeah, so I think that it was interesting how they were saying, when you said that, I thought about how at the end they were saying, "Oh, well, this is just, your rebellion. That we kind of knew this was going to happen. Like this has happened so many times before. Like it's just going to go back to the way it was." It was kind of like they know it was. Remember, he was mapping out. He was like the so and so rebellion of however many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like the leader kind of recognized that these rebellions are inevitable and they're going to happen. And I think I think that relates a lot to, real life. In real life, these, well, like people are always going to be upset with and criticizing where they're living. And people are always going to be divided into classes. I mean, it seems that way. You could say we should try and get rid of classism, but it just doesn't seem like people can live like that. So it's kind of like this inevitable, rebellions are inevitable. This kind of struggle is inevitable. Um, and then the ending of the movie, I was gonna say, was probably my favorite part of the movie. So like another way they kind of went a different path than a regular narrative I think was the ending, it kind of to me felt like a new start for mankind. That's kind of how I saw it. Like at least the way they were dressed when they came out, the way they were looking around at the world. I was thinking, is he trying to say something about like how the whole world is cyclical like this? Like we start over as humans and build our way up, and then there's like a big crash, and then we start over again.
Yeah, it's seemingly like the only way to make complete change is to like rise from the ashes almost. I don't know if
Hmm.
you got that same thought in your head, but I that kind of like I was shocked, and my initial thought was I can't believe that they did this, and it seems almost like a loss because you only see one survivor, but you can theorize there could be a few others, but there's definitely massive loss of life. But it does feel like if there is to be real change, which again I think was the ultimate outcome, it has to come from the ashes rather than just trying to manipulate a current system that's already in place.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that it was all very interesting. Like I would have expected, Chris Evans' character to maybe take over, and then there's like a very happy ending. But it's like this wasn't really a sad ending. Like even though, pretty much all the characters are gone, uh, it's like it's refreshing. I liked it, except one thing, and this is just me saying this, but the fact that they saw the polar bear means they're pretty screwed because that polar bear is like gonna kill them pretty quickly.
I a similar thought went through my head. I was like, they're pretty close to that bear. And polar bears, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are the most aggressive type of bear.
Yeah, because they're carnivores.
Yeah, so that it could be, very bad for them, but it was very interesting, definitely fully unexpected because I think maybe you probably just expected the door would just blow open and like they wouldn't completely destroy the whole train. Obviously the engine
Yeah.
also went, so there was a huge complexity there, but I did not expect like the complete derailment of the entire train that way. It felt very impactful and like a really big move to do as a director. So I like that a lot as well.
Yeah, and like that scene was really well done. And I also wanted to say like the action scenes were like pretty cool. They were really well done. Um, I thought when they were shooting at each other across the train with the submachine guns was kind of funny and ridiculous, but it was like really well filmed and like and acted out.
Yeah, I would think, and I'm sure there could be an example that might be better than this, but I don't think so off the top of my head. But getting to work with CGI and this film did it very well because it's not generally something that Bong Joon-ho has worked with to my knowledge, and he was still able to excel in the same areas that he normally does. So I really like that. And I was talking to you about the action scenes. They felt very stylistically done. Those like really impactful, violent fight scenes were really well done. And I really enjoyed that. And I'm glad you mentioned it because it was definitely a highlight of this film that I kind of forgot to mention up until this point.
Yeah, yeah. This is a good movie overall. I think this is also a very accessible movie.
I completely agree. I would probably say, like on an accessibility scale, Bong Joon Ho as a whole, like Parasite and Mother are probably a little bit harder to find access to, but I still think it's something that, like, if you just like give full focus on, I think it's something that you can definitely understand and even get some of the deeper thoughts to it. But I think this one is probably the most accessible of his films that I've seen so far.
Yeah, yeah.
One additional thing that I want to say narratively in the storytelling of this, I loved the character arc of Chris Evans, and it all kind of just happens between a conversation of him and the person who is kind of getting them through every gate. That conversation, while there's scenes where there's a ton of action going on, and there's a lot of story going on, a lot of CGI going on, what have you. That scene is actually one of my favorite. Like the ending, it felt like it was able to ramp it up more and more and more as it went on, even when it felt like it got to a place where it was getting hard to top itself. And it was able to do so for the most part through strictly conversation. So when Chris Evans kind of he unveils his whole background and his relationship with the tail leader, that was one of my favorite parts of the whole movie. And I love that it still had kind of secrets in store, and it gave you a completely different look at that character. And I think that fits into the whole narrative that me and you were kind of exploring about how leaders are also flawed people.
Yeah, yeah. I remember that scene you're talking about. And it was like the scene where I was like, he's finally like opening up, I feel like talking about something, apart from, what's currently going on the train. And then like through conversation, kind of like you were just saying, like you learn different things. Like you learn that he was 17 when it seemed like the disaster happened and everything froze. And then you get to learn that girl who was with the drug addicts, the guy who was getting them through the gate, was basically born on the train and she had never seen Earth before. And I thought that was really cool too. So they did a lot of they made a lot of the characters interesting. I feel like the only problem, maybe not the problem I had with the movie was I wanted them to be fleshed out a little more, like especially the Gate character. I wanted to see a little more like about his character because I thought he was really interesting. But I'm sure this is just one of those things where like this was adapted from a book and those characters are way more in depth in the book. But yeah, I agree. I think he did like the best job he could of conveying that kind of detail while also making his main focus on like the plot line and the action.
Absolutely. Overall, Matt, I gave this a 4 out of 5. I thought it was great. And I kind of talked about like of the films I've seen from Bong Joon-ho, this is the lowest rated of the very limited amount I've seen. But it's still, I think it shows a lot of elements that don't get explored in his other films. So if you've seen some of his films but haven't seen this yet, I definitely recommend it for that reason alone. Matt, what did you think of Snowpiercer?
So like I'm in the same camp as you, whereas like I've seen The Host, this, and Parasite. The Host got like I think I gave it 4 out of 5. Parasite was 4.5 out of 5. This one I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I like this movie. I thought it was very it was much more American and commercial than his other movies. Like it's still got the Bong Joon-ho, elements to how it's filmed and the storytelling aspects. But it's like I said before, it's more accessible. Like I would love to watch this movie with my family. I think they would all love it, and we would have like some interesting discussions, kind of like the one we just had after we watched the movie, which makes for a great movie in my opinion.
Yeah, and just something I want to say very quickly before we move on. It stems back from a comparison that you made, and it was when I brought up Alfred Hitchcock and you brought up Christopher Nolan. Something that I think kind of emboldens your comparison is that I think of the working directors right now, Christopher Nolan is kind of, he is able to put into the mainstream these kind of elevated movies that you're able to dissect and have like meaningful discussions about, but it is both accessible and interesting and mainstream enough for it to garner a very wide net. And I think that's something that Christopher Nolan has made a career doing. And I think this movie is like a prime example of Bong Joon-ho being able to do that very thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I would have seen this in theaters in 2013, I would have definitely loved it and would have been like, where can I see more movies like this? You know, it's just really good overall. And I could totally see this playing in like an American theater and people really enjoying it.
Absolutely. The next film that we watched is The Handmaiden. This is Park Chan-wook's film, and through watching a couple of movies of him, Old Boy being a really, really big example of that, you begin to realize, much like Bong Joon Ho, that he likes these kind of narratives that unveil themselves over time, where there's almost like a great reveal near the end. And Handmaiden has that. Its narrative is definitely different because it's done in chapters, where each chapter is meaningful, in which one thing's revealed in chapter one, another major thing in chapter two, and then again in chapter three. And also a very, there's perversion to sexual nature, and then very sexually charged, both Old Boy and Handmaiden. But what I appreciated the most from this movie, The Handmaiden specifically, is how the characters get fleshed out throughout the entirety of the film, and how the reveals are, one, built up to where you want to get the reveal, and then how the reveal is actually done. So this is a story much like Parasite, where there's a socioeconomic divide, and the kind of less off characters are trying to con the better off characters, and we kind of see how that through line gets weaved and twisted throughout the chapters. Matt, what was your kind of original thought after finishing The Handmaiden?
So this movie, I didn't really know what to think after it. I liked it, but I also felt like something was missing for me. Like I liked the characters, but maybe I just didn't like them enough uh to want like for the movie to go into the direction it did. Maybe I just wasn't expecting it, or I don't know. Something fell flat about it for me, but it's hard for me to put exactly like for me to explain exactly what it was. But honestly, for the goods aspects of it, I thought like the whole time I was like I was paying attention really closely because I feel like it's one of those movies you really have to be like following closely so you don't get lost. Um, but I thought the way that all the character like how you learn, for example, about the stepdad kind of early on, but then when they go to part two you learn a lot more about how terrible he is, and then you kind of see him at the end of part two and part three, you know, in current day, and you see like, oh, he's actually, you know, knows the character. I'm not going to remember any of their names. The main guy con artist that you he has a relationship with him in this way you don't expect, and in that, in the way it like weaves itself around like that, but it still does manage to like make sense, and I was able to follow it. I enjoyed that part of it. That made the movie fun to watch for me.
Yeah, and I feel like I have a very close understanding of exactly what you're talking about, because through chapter two, I had a very similar feeling in that I don't know if underwhelmed is the right answer. It wasn't clicking with me until chapter three. And at that point, very much like what you said, the intricacies of the story really started to resonate with me, and I found it to be just really really impressive how you get to see other perspectives of scenes that took place earlier on through the film, but through the lens of that character, what they believe to be true and what they're trying to accomplish. That was the point where I started to get even more engaged because, like you said, you do have to stay a very active viewer of this movie to kind of keep up with everything it's trying to do. And when you do that, you are able to keep the through line throughout. But this is not really a movie you can daydream during and not miss major parts. But I will say that and kind of the reveals as to how disturbed the old man was and the punishment that happens, all the small details like the main con artist smoking all of his cigarettes on his way to be interrogated. Those little things begun to add up in chapter 3 where I was so impressed that it felt like it finally, the picture, I could see the full picture. Um, and but I felt the exact same way you did throughout it because it just felt it was a kind of a narrative that I was very used to in chapter 1, and then chapter 2 it felt as though it was just a twist, and then chapter 3 it felt like that's where it kind of transcended just a twist and became something that was like, I can't believe they thought all of this through, and they did it very well, I thought.
Yeah, yeah, I was like honestly coming into this wanting to be like to like the movie more after our discussion, which I think I probably will. But like what you just said about how you get to rewatch scenes that like I guess that wasn't really something I initially thought like is how impressive it is now that I'm thinking about it now. Like I'm realizing he did that extremely well, like especially like the even better twist for me was not, finding out that they're lesbians and they like each other, but that she like the non-handmaiden. Okay, the original guy who's scamming with the lady with the fortune. You realize, like, when you finally start to realize they're working together and they know that they don't like each other because he knows she likes women. And there's that one scene where they're like kissing on the rock and he has to fake it. Or they
Mm.
both have to fake it. She's like, I don't know if I could do this. Like, and you see that scene from both perspectives. I did, like, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that was really cool because, like, you see the scene in a completely different way the second time. And it's like, the first part one, you're watching and you're thinking this lady's totally getting scammed and you feel really bad for her. Part two, you're like thinking the opposite. You're thinking, okay, they're basically scamming the handmaiden here so she can get out of being with her uncle. And then part three, you're like, oh wait, the main guy's getting scammed. It's like very
Mm-hmm.
cool now that I think about like how it transitions, and you're in a way it makes me think of like a murder mystery movie, even though it's nothing like that. It's like it's kind of playing with the viewer in a similar way.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure there's tons of movies that are an even better example that is like similar to this, but in a way that it kind of broke the mold as far as like perspectives. The closest example I can think of off the top of my head is Rashomon, and what that did as far as like exploring different narratives, and that you can tell a story from a different perspective that can be completely different than what another perspective is, and have the viewer have to like come up with their own truth or what they're trying to get from the movie. I think this film did, and put a really fresh twist on like a complete classic.
Yeah, it's like for some reason I just thought of like Boogie Nights and
Mm.
Mongolia or Magnolia, even though they're completely different. It's like in those movies like the ensemble cast, like it's not a twist, like they're kind of all working together to say a similar message in the end. But here it's like that message is like twisting around and these different perspectives you're getting change the story and narrative of the story completely, which I think is like really creative and interesting.
And I really love how the pacing of revealing the history behind especially that main family was done, because you just pick up these little secrets, whether it be about like the true nature of what happened to the aunt, and one of the specific ones that they bring up early on and then you actually are able to realize is the basement. They bring that up
Mm.
about the little girl who is the woman with the fortune as an adult throughout the majority of the narrative, but they flash back to a punishment where she's kind of whipped and then taken to the basement, and you can see how afraid of the basement she is. So it's this thing built up that kind of stays in the back of your mind where you want to know, like, why is this so bad? And then once it's revealed and you realize how truly dastardly not only that is, but the uncle is. I love when films can do that, where they build something up and then you get a fitting reveal. And I thought that was done spectacularly with this film.
Yeah, I thought that was too. It was like you see how more depraved the uncle is uh as time goes on. But I have a question because I never quite understood exactly what happened to the aunt. I mean, I think it's presumed that he killed her and then he hung her out there because she said, "Oh, when people die, this happens," and I didn't see that with the aunt. But I was wondering, like, did it all stem from when she was talking to, I guess the daughter, who's the lady with the fortune when she's young? Did it all stem from when they were looking at like the that like sexual book together, or why did she why did she try and run out at that one part and then the gates got shut on her?
Yeah, I think she didn't want the same fate for the woman with the fortune in current time.
Okay.
So I think she was trying to find a way to save her, and I think the uncle felt that if she cannot she can corrupt the younger girl, and also she can blow the lid on everything going on here. And that's my assumption. And also I think when you look at like how disturbing an individual he is, I I believe he felt it might draw even more allure to like I don't even know what the hell you would call like that type of show that they're doing. It's like a live reading, I guess you could call it, but that it might be beneficial to have a younger girl do that. As depraved as that is, I feel like he thought it could even be a beneficial change all the while.
Yeah, okay. I'm seeing it more now. It's like she knew what was coming for her, and that is actually what ended up happening.
Yeah, and I did find it to be interesting that she propagated that same story to, the girl that she falls in love with. Like, even though she knows that's not the case, she maintains that lie. And it might even just be out of fear for, like, if she tells someone else and that gets out, then she might be punished again. You know what I mean? That she says, oh, well, that's where my aunt hung herself, even though she knows that's not true.
Yeah, and I think, that goes on, or that's kind of about the themes that I got from this movie and that I did like about it was it says there, I think it's trying to say a lot about like, you know, obviously sexual like deviancy or whatever you would call it, like the kind of sick fetishes and desires that the uncle has, along with like the fact that because this is set in the 1930s, that like all that stuff was extremely forbidden back then.
Mm.
So like you know the uncle is like basically very powerful and sadistic because he gets away with doing all this, pretty bad stuff that wouldn't be acceptable in like popular culture at all back then. Like it was probably a very conservative time in 1930s Korea in terms of like sexuality. Um so I think like those like what it says about that is interesting, and also like kind of what you just touched on, like the upbringing part, how she still conveys that story. It's like her upbringing is like I'm talking about the lady with the fortune here. Her upbringing is very like present in who she still is, like in the modern time period, and like I think a lot of part two of the movie is like trying to establish that.
Yeah, and this by no means is like a straightforward romance, but that's certainly a strong element of what's going on here, especially past the midway point. And this film seems to have some commentary. I think it's like very interpretative, but stuff you can dive really deep on. That this film is trying to present that being your true self is a something like you were saying that wasn't something that was it was very taboo in the time in which this is set, but also that is something that is like really important, and that is what's able to kind of break the mold for lack of a better term, like the callous person that the woman with the fortune had been. And I think even you could argue the same thing for the handmaiden, in that because she came from poverty, she was always trying to get one over on other people, but she was able to like fully put her trust and work together with the woman with the fortune because they were able to, I guess, show their true nature with one another. I think that's a very big theme that Park Chan-wook was trying to get across, at least from my viewing.
Yeah, I think you can say that, and this might be like more metaphorically, but like just the whole fact that they are frauds in the
Mm-hmm.
first place is kind of like totally on that same like line of thinking. Um, because they're the whole time, especially the guy who's posing as the count, he's faking completely being someone he's not at all. And you learn that his true self, he's kind of uh just like a kind of sucks. He's very much of like a true fraud, like he's like a true fraudster that doesn't really seem to have as much of an internal like like a true self, I guess you could say. Like it's like this his fraud self is more also his true self. Like I think of that line he said where he's like, I just want all this so that I can like order wine without having to look at the price.
Mm-hmm.
And then the handmaid, she's more like, it feels like there's more to her. Like and especially with I think the main character ends up being, and I hate that I keep calling her the lady with the fortune, but like I can't think of her name. It's like Heigl or something. But I think she ends up being the most complex character, and you don't expect that at the beginning at all.
No, because she seems so cold, so calculated, and very closed off, which really lends itself well to what chapter 1 is trying to accomplish. And I think by keeping her so mysterious is what makes chapter 2 and chapter 3 so enriching, because then you're able to really break through the surface and find out more and more about her. I want to slightly switch gears just because it did greatly impact me was that when they go to the basement, the count and the uncle, I was like pretty deeply disturbed, and it was very subtly done, and I just absolutely love it because it was visually the the prototype of what you would call visual storytelling, because again, I've said it already, but the basement has this aura around it, and then you see this squid, this giant squid, just thrashing around in the water in this basement, and you realize there's probably multiple horrors that are yet to be seen. You see what's done to the count, which is brutal in its own regard, but then you realize how devious, how disturbed the uncle is, and you see the squid, and it makes you almost grimace at the thoughts of what has gone on in that basement. I just have to illuminate that because that was, I think favorite would come off weird, but it was like, as far as what was done visually there, I thought it was one of the most brilliant parts of the movie.
Yeah, right when you said the squid part in the basement, I immediately remembered because like I was watching this with my girlfriend and I said, "Well, that's so cool." Like right when the squid, I mean, it's the basement itself, is pretty terrifying, but I thought that giant squid in the tank was super. It's like a cool addition to it. I thought it just made the whole it like gave a different aura, like you were saying, to the whole basement. But I that made me think of a kind of a question I have because I hadn't seen this movie. But so the part that stuck out to me like about the basement the most, and this is just because as we've talked about, I think in the last episode, I am not the best with gore in movies. So the part where his fingers, were coming off was pretty horrifying to me. And I was wondering, is that similar to Old Boy? Because I know you were telling me before
Mm-hmm.
we started this, you love that movie. I haven't seen it. I've heard that it's very brutal. And so I was wondering, is the whole basement scene with the squid and, how kind of deprived and it's kind of like medieval torture stuff. Is that similar to Old Boy?
So there's one scene, and I actually, if I'm remembering it correctly, it leaves a lot of it up to imagination. There, I think it does show blood after what happens. So visually, it does it so you know exactly what happens, but you don't actually see like the wound like up close, or like tearing, or the actual cutting up close, but then you just see kind of blood coming out after the fact. So that scene is really really effective. I think it'll make you slightly squeamish, but it's not like really really bad like some other gore like Saw or anything like that. It's or Hostel. It's not actually showing you. It pretty much presents it, and then it's like the aftermath is like, oh my god, this thing happened, and like, it has happened. But the other really disturbing part is a reveal, but it has nothing to do with gore. So I guess to answer your question, it's done just as subtly as it's done with this one, where it's brutal, just like what happened, but it doesn't like it's done subtly enough to it's not like just like
Yeah.
glamorizing the gore, I guess.
Yeah, no, I was actually more interested like for a good reason. Like I thought like while that scene did like scare me, um I thought it was like well done and it was like it was different than like the In My Skin where it just felt very like repetitive and there wasn't a lot of reason for it. This one for me felt like it felt like it had built up to that or like that was it was the right call for that to happen. And I did actually even though it was I'm not the biggest gore fan. I did actually like that scene. I liked the whole kind of part where they would go into the basement because I like being scared during movies. So it was more of a like if Old Boy is similar, it would actually make me want to watch it more.
I'm telling you, the ending of that film is so like the twist is so powerful. I think you'll love it. I think you will absolutely love it. And again, I think it's done like really well the same way as this. And I think Old Boy is even more impactful in the violence, and also like the twist, I think is also more impactful. But yeah, they like building that up, the basement, and then what happens to the count is they build it up correctly, and it was impactful. And I loved the twist with the cigarette. I already kind of alluded to it, but when do you remember he's being driven in by like two, I don't know, I'll call them bodyguards, and he asks for a cigarette and he puts three in his mouth, and they're all like regularly self-wrapped cigarette, and it leaves only the blue cigarettes. And immediately, for whatever reason, like I just zoned in on that, and I was like, that was like, the director is so calculated, that is certainly meaningful, like that he would put three in. I originally thought he was lighting a cigarette for himself and the two people beside him, which I thought was weird, but I love how that small detail becomes a very big factor just a few minutes later.
Yeah, I did not notice that. Um, but yeah, yeah, one. I feel like this might just be the best time to bring this up. I have another question. I was kind of confused about why she like when she destroyed the all the library and the books. Was it because she found out she was reading the erotica stuff and then she got upset, or was there something more to it?
Yeah, I think that was a huge part of it. I felt like it was like a way to get past that for her, because I think like the books almost are representative of the trauma in the past. And I also thought it was a way to stick it to the uncle as well. So I thought it was twofold. And there might be something even deeper additionally, but I thought it was revenge against the uncle for doing that, and also like a way for her to like come to terms, but also like get over that part of her past.
Okay. Oh yeah, see that all makes sense because there's a lot in this movie about like personal like you would say like trauma stuff or stuff from your past being brought up, and also, you know, despite everything in your past, still trying to be who you are internally. I think that is kind of like the main point of the movie.
And another thing, and I know I'm heaping praise on this movie a lot, but I think that's just such a unique way to illustrate trauma, or like having a messed up past, like reading erotica to older gentlemen. It's just because it's not, I don't know any other movie that's really done that at all, and specifically definitely to represent that in a greater like metaphorical or like thematic way. And like that brings me to a part of a book that I read from Andrei Tarkovsky, where he kind of talks about his films, and he talks a lot about something called mise en scene, which I think in a foreign language it actually like directly translates to like the way you shoot something, in that there are cliche ways to film something and give a feeling or a thought to the audience, and his goal has always been to communicate that in a way that gives you that feeling, but also does so in a unique way. And that's why he's always kind of married poetry to cinema. like, his father was a poet, so that obviously played a huge role to him, but it allowed him to kind of explore things that give you that exact kind of thought and representation, but in a completely newly thought out way. And he used haikus to do so. And I'm drawing it back to this movie because, like I said, that's such a unique way to kind of get that message across, and I really really liked it because it's something that you have to kind of think about, because on the face of it you don't initially understand how like weird that is until you really get a lot more context on it, and then it really begins to paint the full picture of it.
Yeah, yeah, I think what's well, I'll first respond then to your point, and then I had something else I was gonna add that's similar. Um, yeah, I think the way like what I've like come to realize, I guess, more thinking about the movie in our discussion is how this is just such a like well-crafted movie. Like it's like someone that's at the like at the height of their craft, and like an art creating like perspective. Like he's like he's talking about like because this came out in like 2016, so this is a very contemporary topic in 2016 and still today about people's trauma, and like there's a rise in people definitely like seeking therapy and kind of thinking about how their past shapes who they are now. I think that's a very like contemporary way that we think about things. And so he's kind of playing on that, but he's also said it in the past, in the 30s, when that entire discussion and dialogue that people have now, like people didn't have it back then, at least not in public. Like I'm sure people had it amongst uh, their family and people they knew very closely, but it, it's like it's in a period where that whole like talk is much more subdued, so you kind of get like this more genuine picture of how people are like, because I'm thinking about the handmaid and the lady, they're very secretive about everything, but that's well, like you're looking behind all these frauds, and them together is the genuine relationship in the movie. It's like what matters, and that kind of leads into what I was going to say, that I said I was going to have an add-on about, in addition to your response to what you said, and that's that I think there's still societies today that kind of promote this sort of like dynamic between all these characters. Like I think of places in the Middle East or in other parts of different continents where like women aren't allowed to do much of anything, and I'm sure that there's places where they are allowed to do stuff like read like sexual exotic stories to a bunch of like men that are just enjoying themselves to it. And it's like this weird dynamic where like sexual things aren't allowed to be said, but at the same time like that seems to make the guys at least like even extra ultra like sexually driven. um do you get what I'm saying? Like that's
Yeah.
I think that's another kind of thing. Like that kind of goes with what I said before, but that's another kind of theme I think he's trying to communicate with this movie.
Yeah, you brought up a number of great points. In the first, it seems like the taboo nature of having a woman who's not supposed to be talking about these ultra erotic stories in public doing that, it creates this, like, that is the attraction essentially, like
Yeah.
not in an attraction like I'm attracted to this woman. It's like a circus almost, where it's like, hey, they're gonna have an elephant there, but the elephant is this prim and proper woman who is dressed and wealthy, is gonna be reading these like ultra dirty erotic novels in public.
Yeah, I think it might be like the fact that it's banned or forbidden is part of what gets people really into it.
Exactly. And you know what? You really illuminated something that I think takes it even further for me when I first watched this, and it kind of ties to one of the films we discussed last time we recorded, is that I get a similar theme of repression being really, really huge in this, because I do think it is something that you do see oftentimes when trauma is felt by someone, especially early on. There is a tendency to just try to repress that portion of your life. So if you are traumatized in a sexual nature just due to like how it was done with the wealthy woman, you almost want to like cut out anything sexual from your life because it brings you too close to that trauma. And this story is almost bringing you through how she is able to kind of break through that repression. And I think that's why the sexual relationship with the handmaiden and the wealthy woman is such a focal point of this, and why those scenes are so drawn out, because it's to show those breakthroughs being made. So it's even more than her just being able to be herself. It's her being able to regain a part of herself that she had shut out for so long.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like that is what I was trying to say. Like the repression theme is kind of like central to this movie, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think that's why this movie, especially on Letterboxd, has such a high rating. I think this might like appeal the most to maybe like people going through puberty in general, or just like growing up and realizing like they like what they like sexually or even non-sexually. Like it's a it would be like considered a freeing movie like for people like that. Like they watch this, and as you're growing up you realize, hey, I might actually, like I've been repressing this thing from my because of this that happened in my past. Look how like exciting it is, and how like happy these people seem to be when they're like being their genuine selves, and they like let go of that. I think that can be like an inspirational thing that people really like, they really relate to. And I feel, but the thing is, you kind of have to dig into that with the movie, because I think it's so like complex, and especially in its narrative structure, that like when I first finished it, I didn't really think of that, because I think I had to think of the movie more. Like I think it would be an even better one on rewatch, because like yes, it is really cool to see it revealed, but personally, I think part of the reason that I rated it so low on the first time was because I was confused.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do think a rewatch would benefit it, because I think understanding everything you understand from the get go and getting to see all three perspectives would make it very interesting to watch it through. I would be really interested to see how that changes the movie, quite honestly. It's almost like Sixth Sense, where once you watch that through with the understanding of the twist, it'll make you look at every interaction completely differently, I feel. I could see that
Hmm.
definitely being the case with this movie.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit like the twist doesn't ruin a rewatch for this, it could make it better.
I completely agree. Um, yeah, I really dug this. But I think like definitely it took me a while to fully marinate in this movie, because I think you brought up a really good point. It does take a lot of mental energy to kind of understand all these twists and turns, and like quite frankly, like the whole repression theme and regaining a part of yourself, that isn't something that I was really able to have click until we were talking about it, and I kind of got your thoughts and feelings of the movie. Like that was when it finally clicked for me. So I do think there's a lot of richness to this movie that kind of comes out after really like allowing yourself time to explore everything that's going on with it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think you could compare it to in terms of like its rewatch value, like Parasite. Like it's you watch it the first time and all these things kind of happen and you're like, whoa, like this the way the story is twisting and turning is really interesting and it's a little surprising like on the first watch. I'd say like this is similar, but on a rewatch of Parasite, which I actually have seen that one twice, I really still I enjoyed it like just as much, probably maybe even a little more on the rewatch, just because I was like waiting for a certain part that I liked to happen, and uh, a lot of it was seeing it with other people, you know, and getting to see their experience with it. But at the same time, it's just like when a movie. I'm gonna make like a kind of silly comparison, but like when music's really good, and you listen to it more over time, it gets better. And I feel like that can be the same way for like a movie that's masterfully crafted like this and interesting. Like when you watch it more and more, it probably gets better.
I think that's a really good point. And this feels like when you said this feels like a director at the top of their craft, I feel very similar to that. Because I think there's just so much under the surface of what's going on, and there's so many details. Everything just feels like just jam packed with things to uncover. I find that to be the case. Another Park Chan-wook movie that I've seen, I initially rated it like slightly lower than what I had seen from other people, but it's Decision to Leave. And there was a lot of elements to that story that it just didn't immediately click with me, but I do think that much like this movie, that movie also, it's something that once you get an initial understanding of like where the movie's going, it can almost free your mind to think deeper about these smaller points that are going on throughout the movie. So, but I think there's something greater to be said about that when a movie has that much to offer, because I do think for the majority of mainstream movies, it is very much crafted to not do that. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad sense, but they're crafted so that you can almost have the full understanding after you've watched through it one time. But I think there's something to be said to the art making process of a director who respects the audience enough to try to put a lot of information in there that can be gathered from multiple watches. What is your perspective on that? When a director can achieve that, and how they feel about the audience if they do try to achieve that as well.
Yeah, so like the first thing that came to mind, I think the best way to describe my point of view is like you think of or I think of a movie I would consider like a comfort movie. And I think that the most relatable type of film to most people would be something like a rom-com or maybe like, and these are movies I love. These are just way different movies. Like a movie like Step Brothers, where you watch it, you know what's happening, you kind of know like of course the first time watching it it's hilarious and that's what makes you want to watch it again, right? But on the other times it's like you know it's coming, you like these jokes and you're prepared, but it's not but that's completely different than like this kind of movie or like a Parasite where like you watch it again and it's like I at least would go in expecting I might find something in the movie I haven't seen or noticed yet that I like more, and it makes it like improves the movie for me. Um, or like when there's so much, like when you were saying, it's like jam packed with stuff happening. Like every scene, like there's no wasted time in this, even though it's 2 hours and 25 minutes. Like it feels like every scene has a purpose. When a movie is like that, when it's very like the plot is very detailed, structured, and it's convoluted and it's kind of hard to follow on the first time. I find those types of movies to like get more enjoyable as you continue watching them, as opposed to like a comfort film where you could watch it a bunch of times, but you're watching them for a completely different reason. Like I'm not gonna go in and watch Step Brothers with the same mindset I would want to rewatch this movie. You know, I'd have to like gear myself up a little bit before I started this again.
Yeah, and I think you kind of answered that, but I just want to throw at on a grander scale, like how do you view your relationship with like art house films and I'm talking about like deeply symbolic and super thematic films, the likes of The Holy Mountain, Blood of a Poet, films like that that are really narratively different, that are very very interpretative. Like, how do you view your relationship with that? How do you look at those films?
Okay, yeah. So I have a couple good examples I could talk about because it's only recently where I've actually gone and rewatched a couple of like more art house films, and that was because they were showing at my local theater. Um, Whereas I had already seen them just on my TV, and I was like, okay, these deserve to be seen in a theater. But they're Workmeister Harmonies, a Bellatar movie, and Contempt, a Godard movie, which I had seen both of those recently in the past week or two at a theater. And when I rewatched them, they were completely different, honestly. Like the first time, I realized my first watch, I really appreciated them because they felt complex, and I was sort of surprised at how a movie could be like that, and like the themes it got to me, like what it I took from it was definitely, I would say the themes were less on the first watch just because I was so surprised with like the narrative structure, like especially in a Godard film. Like when you're watching Godard for the first time, half my brain is going like is still trying to piece together a plot that doesn't even exist. Whereas the second time around, I know what to expect. I know it's going to be kind of weird in these ways. And I came out like in Contempt, for example, I came out of the rewatch realizing how why I liked it so much. And that movie, it was because you know, I thought it detailed how people break up with each other very realistically, along with the cinematography. But you just, for me, it kind of, in a rewatch, I'll either confirm that, like, wow, I love this, like, this really deserved, like, a 5 star or something. Or maybe I'll go, it maybe was more of the shock factor the first time, and that's why I thought it was so good. And now on the rewatch, I still enjoy it, but I realized that I think the reason I liked it so much the first time was because of how different it was.
Yeah, and something that kind of came to me, because it sounded like you were describing like a similar feeling that I've felt with these very very complex, symbolic, off the wall and just generally different movies, is that when done well, these films almost connect with you via a subconscious level, which you just, that is very very rarely done, but especially when not everything connects until either you rewatch it or you just try to like kind of go point by point what it was trying to do, but you still you have a innate understanding of it, and even though it's like completely a different narrative, you're able to glom on to these kind of weird facets that they use to explain different things. And I do think that is the brilliance of what some art house films are able to do, is that it's able to connect with you even though you're not even fully understanding how you're interpreting the film.
Yeah, and you want to know something interesting is there's like Contempt. This is how it happened with Contempt with me. Like over time, like I didn't even initially rate it 5 stars, but like it sat in my head, and like when things would happen in real life that was like similar to the movie or reminded me of the movie, I would start thinking a lot about the movie, and it was like over like a period of, I'm talking like months even, like I started liking the movie more. It was this very weird thing, and that's only really happened with like art house movies. It also happened with this other movie called Fat City, um, where I just like there are certain scenes I keep thinking of in my head, and it's like they don't leave my head, and that makes me like the movie a lot more.
You know the director with whom I think I was able to do this the most so, and I don't know. I think you could probably definitely strongly consider this director very art house. Is Andrei Tarkovsky. His films, I think like immediately after viewing, I will have like a really great appreciation of it, and then when I think about it and then gain other people's perspectives on it, those films just are so enriching, and it just keeps appreciating in value in my head. But the beauty of it is these visual scenes that if you just look at them without any context of the movie, they even still could kind of draw out of you these feelings that work perfectly in the narrative structure of the movie. And I do think there are very few that are better at being able to kind of draw that out of people. But I absolutely love that about his films. And I do think that is why I've been trying to experiment more with art house films. Whereas 5 years ago, that would have been something that I would just kind of write off because I didn't fully understand it. But he was someone who kind of broke that mold for me.
Yeah, yeah, I think, yeah, it's just a lot of like big philosophical type themes for me. I think it's all very personal, like the way everyone does it. Like some people maybe will never appreciate an art house film because it's just not possible for people to see a movie that way. I do think it is technically possible for everyone to. I think you in order to allow yourself to enjoy a movie like that where it kind of sits in your head, you really just have to be open to experience something new, and you can't go into it being like, oh, this wasn't like a narrative film I could follow very well, therefore I hate it. Like you
Mm-hmm.
have to just like take it for what it is, you know? Like you have to realize a lot of these art house films, they're trying to convey something more than just an entertaining story to you. I think Handmaiden is definitely one of those movies.
And this is by no means like trying to criticize people who are not fans of art house films, but I think there's a relationship of, and I'm trying to think of the actual term because I think it actually works perfectly, but it's like immediate reward, right? You watch, let's say I'm just gonna pick one, Top Gun Maverick, right? You watch it and you get like a immediate reward from the film, like you can immediately enjoy it, whereas there's something whenever you are like, okay, I'll work hard today for a reward in the future. And I forget what that term's called. Matt, you might know that, but that's almost what art house film evokes, where it's like you watch it and you don't immediately get the reward of fully understanding what it's trying to say, but it puts all the pieces in your head so that over time you can kind of put them together to get the actual picture, which in arguably can be a more rewarding experience as a whole because you delayed gratification, I think is what it's called. Do you kind of feel that to maybe be true, or do you think I'm generalizing or maybe misrepresenting that kind of difference between what is considered mainstream and what is considered art house?
No, I think you're right. And it's like, and I know you were saying this too, but it's like, you know, Top Gun Maverick isn't a bad movie. Like it's just, I don't, because I don't think it ever really gets explained very well to people like this. I think people just show people other movies and they don't tell them like, here's what you need to go in expecting. But like like the immediate gratification thing. Like I walk out of a movie like Top Gun Maverick, like you're thinking, wow, that was a really good movie. Like I had fun watching that movie. Like it was a good time. And you think like on the entertainment scale, that's super high. Like I really had a great day, and the way you'll think about or at least that I would think about that movie is in the future. I would think, oh yeah, I remember when we saw like Top Gun Maverick, that was really fun. But I'm personally not going to be like dying to rewatch it on my own. Like it lives in my head a different way than like a more art house film where I feel like the movies become like more personal to me. Like it's not just like I enjoyed it on this day, but it's like this is happening in my like something's happening in my life and I'll think about the movie. And it's not like I even like look on Letterboxd and happen to see it, but like in the middle of whatever I'm doing during the day, I'll start thinking about that movie, and it's like my inner subconscious or whatever, like telling me like somehow there's been a connection made, like, and they feel personal and meaningful to me. You know, I own a lot of like movies, physical copies of movies now, and I usually only buy the ones that like left that core sort of impact on me. So when I'm kind of looking through my library, I'll like look at a movie and immediately I can think of like how that movie impacted me personally.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the last kind of argument that I will make in favor of people who are standoffish to art house films, I'll preface it with I saw a short film from 1929 directed by Louis Buñuel, and I'm probably butchering that, but he's directed such films as The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, and also Bella de Jour. And I think he's a relatively well known director. He did a short film with Salvador Dali called Un Chien Andalou, and it is like one of the most challenging short films I've seen in quite some time. And I feel like still 90% of that film is still like gone without fruition in my mind. Like even after kind of exploring it and reading some online explanations, and I think there is a fear of committing time to a film and then like not being able to fully like like have it come to fruition in your mind. And I think that is it's a fear that in a lot of these films, especially if they're recommended to you, you might not find that to be true because it can work on a human level where it can connect in certain ways, especially if someone is recommending it. But I think like early on in my movie watching life, that was something that allowed me to like write it off. But I do think that that is not justification for all of art house films, because I do think a lot of the great ones can find that way to kind of worm into your brain, and you can find greater meaning. I don't know. I wanted to throw that at you just to get like a different perspective on the argument, I guess.
Yeah, so that's actually, I think we should totally do a future episode with Bunel because I love his movies. I was just talking about my physical collection. I actually own a few, or like I have a couple sets with his films. I really love them. Um, but yeah, like the way, at least in terms of Bunel, like they like right when you mentioned those movies, I immediately thought of That Obscure Object of Desire, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, and I was like thinking of these scenes I remembered from those, and they're very like surrealist, and they're very creative, and like when I'm thinking creatively myself, I like refer to these types of movies. Like that's I don't know if this is exactly on point to what you were saying. It's just kind of what I was thinking about, but uh it's also like the creativity and I think the images for me. personally. It's like the images themselves leave a lasting impact. Like right after I've seen a scene, like right after I've just watched a scene that impacts me greatly, like I will know immediately I'm never gonna forget this scene. Does that ever happen to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, and usually, let me ask you this: is it usually through dialogue or visually that happens with you?
For me, it's always visually.
Same. Yeah. There's been really great lines that I'll definitely remember, but I can even tell, like, in the moment, I'll see something and it's off, like, it'll be, like, breathtaking. And I'm like, that is when cinema to me, like, transcends.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is also a weird connection that I've seen, and it almost happens exclusively with art house films, but the visual element is so strong in those films. It's such a weird connection that they have such, like, I don't even know how to word, like, pretty visuals always in those, like, deeply symbolic movies. And I think it's because it's so important into aiding in the storytelling, but they oftentimes have the most compelling visual moments of any film I've ever seen.
Yeah, to me, like, and this is just something I thought of now, and it was actually kind of a little revelation I had, but like the scenes that I consider like the most entertaining usually have the best dialogue. And sometimes I even give these films 5 out of 5 stars too. It's like I don't discriminate. Movies work on different levels for me. But those types of movies are usually like way more dialogue driven. I've just kind of realized. Like I think of like this movie I absolutely love called The Insider, this Michael Mann movie I watched again recently a couple weeks ago.
I love that
And
movie.
yeah, it's a great movie, but like I think of like almost all the great parts are like from dialogue, like Al Pacino, like yelling and it'd be and the who is it that play Russell Crowe, like their dialogue exchanges and stuff. Like I love those parts of those types of movies, but like what seems to like last in me is like the visual work, and it is like all those like we were talking about at the beginning, like what kind of foreign movies I like, and I really think like maybe the number one reason I like the French movies so much is they all have, especially New Wave, is they have that visual style that's just very distinctive and different and memorable for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I feel like Godard did that very very well. I think I forget the name of the film, but it's the ending. The leading man paints his face blue. That's the one that I'm thinking of. But everything was so visually striking in that film uh, that it stuck with me just because I can remember, like, just certain things. And I think Weekend is another one where just the visual elements of it will stick with you for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, I love that stuff.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you for joining me today. This was an awesome conversation. Overall, how'd you like the South Korean films that we watched?
I honestly really enjoyed both of them. I think after this conversation, I think my rating for Handmaiden go up to like 3.5 stars. It was at three. But like through this conversation, I've kind of realized like this was truly like a director that's at the top of his craft. Like I said earlier, like this movie is just like so well done. Like I think it really deserves like a higher rating in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely forgot. I gave The Handmaiden a 4.5 out of 5. Um, I think there was some really masterful elements on it, and I know I've said this multiple times at this point, but I highly recommend for you, Matt, and anyone listening as well. Definitely, Old Boy is one of the best foreign movies of all time, in my opinion.
Oh, and don't watch Handmaiden with your family like Snowpiercer. I
Yeah,
would say that.
I completely agree. It will be an awkward watch for sure if you decide to do that. Matt, thank you again, man. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. Thank you for watching, and we will catch you on the Flippity Floop. Bye, y'all.